How many of you do your own data management? Couple? Man, don't be bashful. It's okay. There's a few of us in here. I do it too. It's like an AA meetings, but for making better yield and profit. I am first generation. I started farming in 2012 with 30 acres. That was a blessing and a curse. It sucked because I didn't have any generational wealth. I didn't have equipment. The good side of that is I had no idea what I was doing. So if it was a mistake, we looked at that as a learning experience. And one of the biggest things that I have found, I've been to 46 states and 11 countries now, talking about farming and helping farmers with nutrient management, soil health management. The biggest problem I see, farmers don't do their own agronomy work. How many of you in here do your own agronomy work completely through the season? There's a few. If you want to make money, that right there is one of the jobs that makes me the most money on the farm. And it started out in notebooks. There was a joke with NRCS. I was known as Mr. Notebook because I had 3 ring binders. And I can go show you all the way back to 2012 down to the pound of fertilizer that we applied to certain farms. How much seed did we plant? What was the yield? What was the ROI? That is what has made us money. And the notebooks got to the point where after about 4 or 5 years of farming, well, it's hard to go back and correlate that data because now you've got 5 notebooks stacked out. So one of the things that we've been using is a platform called AgWise. And what it does is, say this farm here, I can look at corn and then say we had beans the next year and corn another year back. I can start stacking those up and where was my microbial activity? How much fertilizer did I use? What was my yield? I can even plug in what my cost, what I'm getting paid if we're hauling to the elevator or if we're selling direct to customers. How much was our ROI on that acre? A lot of times we talk about farm averages, and farm average is really good. But what if you have a field that's performing really, really good and you have a field that's costing you money for 5 years? Should you keep that farm that's costing you money? I think that was like, we built our farm up from 30 acres to 1,400 acres in about 4 years. And then I found out there was about 400 acres of that 1,400 that was consistently losing money. And it was really nice to say I was farming 1,400 acres, but at the same time, why did I continue to do that? And we figured out after about 2 seasons, we let that land go. I would rather keep the acres that are making us money. And so one of the things that you can do is look at digitizing your data. Now, John Deere will keep maps, and you can have yield maps, and you can have your field edges out and stuff like that, but actually correlating in what were our yields, what fertilizer did we use, how do we even do our regenerative progress or your sustainable progress, whatever you want to call that, where I can put in my metagenomics, my PLFAs. I can look at how am I building soil biology and how is that changing our flow of fertilizer. So one of the AI technologies that's coming out this year is called Soil Scripts. We've had a program called Foliar Scripts that we developed, and it came out commercially available last year. We've ran it for 5 years before that. Soil Scripts is going to kind of be the same thing. So how many of you here grow corn? I'm going to pick on some people. What's your name?
Darwin Yost.
All right. If you're going to plant corn, what day variety corn do you plant?
114 days.
About 114 day. If you could pull a soil test and you could go into this program and you can say, I'm going to plant my corn, what's your first planting date typically?
April 15th.
If you can say, I'm going to plant corn on April the 15th, and it can take not only the soil test numbers, but even looking at ratios, potassium to sodium, calcium to phosphorus, all of these different elements. And it can say, based on your soil type, your GDUs, and where you're located in annual rainfall, and it maps it out and it says, at V8, you're going to run short on potassium. Does that help you? Now you know, because we've talked about tissue testing a lot, but when are the targets that we should be tissue sampling? Now we have an AI program that we can say, we're going to plant corn on this day. This is how many GDUs it is, the black layer. And it's going to map that out and say, hey, you're having a sodium to potassium imbalance. And we know sodium displaces potassium. And now it says, hey, at V8, you've got a target that you can go out and pull that tissue test. And guess what? We can pull that tissue test. Well, if it says that we're low, We can still wide drop on potassium at that point. We can run a KTS, you can run a 0012 liquid, or you can go out there and you can foliar apply potassium acetate. So there's products out there and ways that we can treat in-season deficiencies, because there's not been one farm in 46 states and 11 countries that had soil that was perfectly balanced and would supply all the nutrients needed in the correct balances. I've never seen that in my world travels. So as farmers, now we have a tool that we can use with this program that we can start looking at when do we need to test and when do we need to treat a little bit. Well, now it ain't working, Nick. There we go. So let's talk about setting baselines a little bit. So we've talked about soil. We've got biology with PLFA. If you've never heard about that, that gives us our microbial pools and where they're at. We've got tissues. We've got T&D, which is total nutrient digest. We've got some products that we use and even metagenomics. How many of you in here use a biological product? How do you know which one to use? He doesn't. Does anybody know which one to use?
The one that works.
How do you know it's going to work?
Testing it.
I mean, I'm not knocking. I use biologicals too. I use organics, Insul algae. There's a product called Fish It. You can't say that on TV, we found out. My point being is we have a test now with PLFA that we can see how many bacteria do we have, how many fungi, what's our protozoa, what's our saprophytics. Well, if we look at that and we have a boatload of bacteria, do you need a product with a boatload of bacteria? Probably not. If you have no saprophytics and you have no protozoas, do you think that that product that has those two in it are going to be a benefit to your soil and nutrient mineralization? Probably. So this is a way for us as farmers to pull a test, see what we have, see what we need, and find the right product before you spend. How much are you spending on it? You mind to share?
Yeah, we make our own. It's not too much, but yeah.
It's not too much. Anybody in here buy a biological product?
$20 an acre.
$20 an acre. Well, PLFA is going to cost you $55. That's less than 3 acres to test and see what do we need before we buy the product and put it out on the field. Because are you buying 2.5 acres of product at a time? I'm not. A shuttle comes out and you're going to spend $7 to $10 grand on a shuttle tank for biologicals. So this is just ways that we can do it scientifically. So this is what a Haney test looks like if you've never seen one. We've got our soil CO2 respiration, which is our microbial activity, percent MAC, which is how much carbon we use, and it's got our basic N, P, and K. And it's so controversial because everybody says this is not a calibrated test and it won't work in whatever state I go to, which is always funny. Anybody from Extension in here? Don't be bashful. Hey, I'm not picking on all Extension. There are really great workers. When I say Extension, I'm talking about North Carolina. And I'll be honest, most of mine suck. There's a few of them that are good, and the rest of them, they're there for retirement. That's all I can say. So don't take any offense. I'm not talking about Extension here. But I was told that if I use this test, that my farm would never yield well and would never be profitable. 6 months later, we set a new state record for like 360 bushel corn that year, and they didn't even want to give me the award because we used this test and we talked to farmers about it. And every time they talk about calibration, I ask for the calibration on Olson and Malik and Bray, and nobody ever can show it to us because they don't have it. It's not, soil tests are not calibrated to every soil type. But essentially we can look at this, like when we look at sodium and potassium, if you're closer than a 10 to 1, you're going to see potassium, that uptake limited. And then if you see potassium uptake limited, you're also going to see nitrogen use efficiency go down. And so, that's where we start seeing a lot of these interactions that even the Haney test itself does not show us some of these interactions, and that's what the AI tool is going to do for our soil scripts. And then we've got tissue tests. They've been around for a really long time, and this is what we used to see as farmers. We were high, sufficient, or deficient. Well, that's really great, but how do you make a management decision off of that? So who in here sells liquid fertilizer? Come on, I'm just making sure we stay away. Oh, come on, we got more than one. There's 2. All right, so I'm not picking on these guys. Well, there's 3. So I'm not picking on anybody that sells products. They do the best job they can. They try to use quality products, and they try to tell us as farmers how much we need. But do they know what my tissue samples are going to be when they make that label? No. They don't know my farming practices. They don't know my area. And so typically when I look at fertilizer recommendations, it can be 1 to 4 quarts. It can be 1 to 6 quarts. Well, I asked a fertilizer salesman one time, I said, which one's right, 1 or 6 quarts? And he said, it depends on if you're buying or selling. That's their best answer. So there's no management here, but we can track these numbers. This is where we've been for the last 50 years. And this is where we'll dive into that in the foliar scripts here in a minute. Now we've got T and D. So I was told by the university that when I started talking about reducing fertilizer, and the great state of Illinois, if you want to make fun of them, they just had a conference and there were 3 CCAs up there. And they said, if you cut back on fertility, you're going to mine your soils. So this farm here has had a 50 or 75% reduction on fertilizer using the Haney test over a meal at 3 for the last 12 years. I still have 2,988 pounds of nitrogen. I still have 1,080 pounds of phosphorus. I have 6,120 pounds of potassium. Do you think I'm mining those soils? Even if I am mining it, does it really matter? If I'm reducing 25 to 50 pounds of phosphorus a year with a 200 bushel corn crop with grain removal rates, does that really matter at those numbers? No. And here's the funny part, that's a 0 to 6. Here's a 6 to 12, same field. We've got 1,980 pounds of nitrogen, 720 pounds of phosphorus, and 5,580 pounds of potassium. I have 13,000 pounds of potassium in the top acre foot on that farm. How much potassium fertilizer do I need to put out? None. If I put out 100 pounds of KCl and apply 60 more pounds of potassium to this soil, does that really matter? Percentage-wise, no, that's probably less than, actually 1%. And so here's how we started doing it. You really want to start tracking nutrient load in your soils? Start doing 2-inch samples. So down here in the bottom, this blue is our CO2. This is microbial activity right here. The next one up is the carbon source that they can feed off of. That's water extractable organic carbon. Then the green is our potassium. The little thin line right here is phosphorus, and nitrogen is on top. Look how all of our nutrient availability correlates to microbial activity. The whole way down. This is a foot deep. To make it a little easier for y'all to see, Liz made me these. CO2 respiration is on the bottom of all of these. This is microbial activity on the bottom, and nutrient availability is on the left. As we go higher, where we're at our 0 to 2, top part of the soil, CO2 is more, microbial activity is more, and nutrient release is more. Now that one was for nitrogen. Here's our total carbon, and these are fairly linear lines from top to bottom. Look at the potassium curve. Look how much potassium is available up here and how steep that curve is, and it flattens off in the bottom as we go down in the profile, as we see CO2 go down. Anybody heard about nutrient stratification? This right here is what we call nutrient stratification. The problem is we've been talking about it the wrong way. The reason we have it, and I'm going to back up a few slides. The reason we have nutrient stratification is because we don't have this deeper in the profile. So where's Nick at? Are you in here, Nick? Man, he said, piss on me. He wouldn't even hear me talk. Flew me all the way out here and didn't even come. Well, what I was going to ask Nick is how deep has he tested his profile? I'm not anti-tillage. If you have to till a field to correct an issue, that's something you have to do. What I'm telling you is every time we do that, we destroy soil aggregation. How do we get biology deeper in the soil profile? Build soil aggregation. There's a guy named Dr. Caligari in Brazil. If you don't know him, look him up. He's been doing no-till and cover crops for about 45, I think it's around 45 years now. He has the same soil aggregation in the top 2 inches as he does 4 feet deep. When you have aggregation down to 48 inches, you have water infiltration, you have easier root exploration, you have more oxygen exchange in that profile, and these numbers, from what we've seen in Brazil, start to even out even more. And as we increase this, we start to increase nutrient mineralization, and that's how we dealing with nutrient stratification. It's that simple. There's potassium. So here's phosphorus. Same thing, pretty linear line as we see microbial activity change. Here's the crazy part. We always talk about aluminum toxicity. It's completely inverted for aluminum. The more biology we have, the less aluminum issues. We're seeing biology buffer that aluminum that we have in the soil from the practices that we've done for a pretty long time before me. And so let's talk about nutrients that are actually available. So in orange is our T and Ds. These are our total pools. The ones in blue, this is how much is actually plant available. So I told you this pool and this pool on potassium, this is 13,000 pounds of potassium between these two orange slides. Well, at 6 to 12, we've only got 2.8% available. And over here at 0 to 6, we've only got 6% available. So I want y'all to think about that. We made the analogy earlier. If I put 100 pounds of KCl out, that's 0060, I'm going to put 60 pounds of that potassium out there. How much is that going to be available? 6% of 60%. That's very little. So this is where we start looking at biological products. This is where we start looking at calfa. I use citric acid. There's those carboxylic acids that we can do to help buffer and break some of this off and make it more available for a couple dollars an acre. What about phosphorus? You know, we keep saying, hey, we need more phosphorus. In the 0 to 6, I have 0.82% of my phosphorus is actually available. You think 100 pounds of DAP and putting 48 more pounds of phosphorus out there is really going to do a big difference when there's already 5,000 pounds of phosphorus right here? Probably not. By the way, if y'all have questions, feel free to ask while we're going through.
Okay, just one, going back to the aluminum toxicity one, how do you know it's biological versus chemical driving that profile?
Well, a lot of times it's driven off of pH. We'll see that pH change deeper in the profile.
Right.
The cool thing for us is we've got all these pHs mapped out, and we were within 0.1 to 0.2. And so we just started systematically eliminating what certain things could be. And typically what we ended up with, and I mean, this is across about 1,000 samples. So I mean, it's a fairly large pool. But when we start looking at it, it's most of the time when we're eliminating pH and a few other factors, we keep running back to the biology. I'm not a soil scientist, but as a farmer, when you start eliminating A, B, and C, and the only thing you're left with D more than likely to meet, that's close enough for me to talk about it.
And you're a Carolina soil.
The 1,000 samples were not all just across North Carolina. Those were across the country. But the ones I'm showing you right now, these are from my soils. Calcium, the same thing, just talking about T and D, where we look at total. How many of y'all like base saturation? Anybody use base saturation on their farm for fertility recommendations?
Not anymore.
Not anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk too much. You know, I was told, once again, I'm first generation. I watched Ag PhD, I watched all these publications, RFD TV, I tried to soak up all the knowledge I could. And we wanted calcium at 75%. We wanted base sats of potassium at 5% or more. We wanted hydrogen to be down. My point is you look at base saturation. Nobody in this room ever uses base saturation. That's kind of crazy. I usually get at least a few of them. My point being is with base saturation, does it rain hydrochloric acid? We'd all be dead if it did. When you start looking at the extractants of Milic-3, Bray for P1, P2, or Olson, those are things that never happen in nature. When they put it on there, they're forcing covalent bonds apart. I was a HAZMAT technician. I do understand a few things from when I was a fireman. But the point being is they're doing something in a lab that never happens in nature, and then giving us a number off of something that never happens in nature, and they expect that to be relevant in how we actually farm. And this right here is more important than base saturation. If you look at what your total calcium pool is, I mean, 44% seems low. If they're telling me on a Milic-3 base sat, I need to be 75%. But I can tell you right now, if you have 44% available out of this pool, it's a lot better available calcium to that crop than 75% is on a Milic-3 base sat. And so we still pull Milic-3, which is what our state typically runs. What do y'all run out here?
I think you're Because those soil tests, what they're measuring is exchangeable, potential exchangeable calcium. They're not available. They're saying this is the potential exchangeable calcium in the system.
And they're saying it's the potential, and I agree with you, and they're saying it's the potential exchangeable calcium, but
Yes.
if my soil pH is a 6 or a 6.5, and I grow plants on it, and the extractant that they use for that Milic 3 has a pH of 2.3, which is close to the same acidity in my stomach, nature never sees that. That's why it's irrelevant.
No, it is not, if you understand behind it. It's the potential exchangeable, which is calibrated. That's why it's the key to the soil test is not the numbers, is does it fall in low, medium, or high? That's the key piece of it, because that's the calibration. Does it fall into low, medium, and high? Because if it's low, what low means, the probability of a response to any application is high. If the tricky part is when it's in the middle. If it's medium, you don't know because you took a multiple soil sample. Were you more on the high side or more on the low side? So that's where the difficulty is. But when you're on the high side, the probability of a response is low.
But that kind of
That's
comes,
what it's about.
yeah, but that comes back to calibration is the word you said.
Yes,
Have you ever seen the calibrations?
yes, we have done those calibrations.
You have them?
Yes. we have
Can I
done-
see them?
If you go back, we can show you in the literature, you can show those calibrations.
Because,
Not for calcium.
Yep.
Not for calcium, but for phosphorus and potassium. The issue is it's never been done localized by field or by crop. It has been done at state levels, and that's one of the disadvantages of it, is that it was done, and that was, when it was done then, is because the way it was funded. Nobody funds a lot of these research to the extent that they could have been done at more localized level. So most of that was done at a statewide level.
which test?
So phosphorus.
No,
potassium,
which test? Which
depends on which state you're in.
Yeah,
Depends on which state you're in. If you're in Kansas and they use Bray 1, then it's calibrated to Bray 1. The problem is if that ppm, that 20 ppm or that 150 is related at a state level.
but you actually have the calibration numbers for Bray?
Yeah, they do. We do have those numbers. The calibration.
Not calibrated to Bray, but the actual Bray calibrations that they made in 1968.
Yeah, they do. We do, and we've been revisiting those calibrations all the time.
Because we've asked for them, and nobody's been ever, the reason I asked to share
can
them.
show you those.
Okay.
I can find those papers.
Man, we're getting on today.
Get the right people.
Well, I actually asked for a question from you earlier, and I said that you said, that's on me, you just left, you didn't want to hear me talk.
The issue with those, as I said, is because they were done at a statewide level. You have, your field is as a unique soil system
Yep.
with a unique cropping system. It doesn't mean that that calibration applied to your system overall, but it was done as a baseline, and that's why, and we have revisited, I worked in my previous job, and we have revisited a lot of these for different crops, and realized that for different crops, 20 ppm don't work for every crop. It doesn't work on every soil system. But that, when it was done at the state level, it was done to show that these calibration of the low, but the key is to focus on is not the number you get from your soil test. Is it low? Based on these ratios, as they say 0 to this is low. Is it low, is it medium, or is it high? And that's where you make a decision on.
And that just gives you a relative response to if you
It's
apply.
a probability of a
Yep.
response.
I'm glad he came. No lie. So Dr. Millick developed the Milic 3 in North
North
Carolina.
Carolina, yes.
We have asked the NCDA and our extension service for his calibration numbers, and they told us they don't have them.
The challenge with soil is that you gotta realize, in soil, you got mobile nutrients and you got immobile nutrients. How they move into the plant.
100% agree.
So the way Bray and some of these soil tests were designed, a lot of them are are better for mobile nutrients or immobile nutrients. That's what any test was trying to capture,
Was,
the mobile nutrients.
Yep.
Because most of the soil tests
Are showing
capture
immobile.
mobile nutrients.
yeah, they're showing,
That's what any test.
and that's an excellent point. I'm really glad. What's your name? Listen, we're gonna be friends after this. We have bonded today. And
He's halfway.
that is my point, is I'm not saying all of them are bad. what I'm telling you is as a farmer, a lot of times what I see, because I still pull Haney test, I pull millet 3 on my farm, that's what we typically do. And we see that they're telling us we have more nutrition than what we actually have with the harsher extractants. That's what I was trying to get at. And it goes back to that calibration. And here's one of the things that AI gave us. And these are not based off of university numbers. These are based off of 50,000 different plot points across the U.S., across different soil types, to where we had a relatively close idea what these nutrient curves were, but AI was able to change that. So you would have a university that would say, if you want to grow 200 bushel corn, then you need to have a tissue boron level of 14 parts per million. But the problem is we had some producers that had a boron of 10 and still made 200 bushel corn. And we had some that were at 20 and still made 200 bushel corn. And AI, which is much smarter than me and faster, was able to take all of the statistical differences between the highs, the lows, and the mediums and where those yields were. And we were able to come up with different sufficiency ranges. And a lot of farmers, let's just take iron, for example. How many of you use iron? 3, 4? 4 people out of the entire room use iron. My point is, look at the iron uptake curve. I mean, we're talking, this is V1. Early season, we're at 50% of our iron need by the time that we get to V4. That's insane. That you're thinking about an entire, just think about that, 4 or 5 months, 50% of it is in the first, 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe? Another big one is we started looking at potassium. Look at the potassium curve. So we did the numbers. I'll tell you exactly what the number is. In our 400 plus bushel corn, when we go from V6 to V10, our plant in 2 weeks, in 14 days, is taking up 115 to 130 pounds of potassium into the plant. How many of you have soils that can take and convert and make available 115 to 130 pounds in 2 weeks? Because I know a lot of farmers that can't do that in a whole season. Mine can't do it in 2 weeks. You know how we do it? When we're at this stage right here, we Y drop KTS. We foliar spray potassium acetate. There are things that we have to do, but it still pencils out when you're making yield like that, as long as you watch what you're doing. But these are curves, because if you don't hit these curves right here, it doesn't matter what we do over here. It doesn't matter if we put a fungicide on the tassel. It doesn't matter if we do any foliar sprays. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter here if we don't get it there, because we're setting yield limiting factors there. So this is what AI allows us to do, and it gives us a prediction. Huh?
We already do that.
What?
Those curves matches a lot of.
It matches some of them.
Because I knew that.
You might have knew that. We should have been friends a long time ago, man. Where you been? I've been writing you letters.
Because what we don't think about is root growth and how the roots actually develop.
Yep.
And a lot of times we got to realize that once the plant tassels, root growth stops. There's no more, so there's a rapid root growth early.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the plant has to explore and get all that nutrients. It has to get it
In the plant.
into the plant quickly, because the difference is once it gets to reproduction tassel, the plant says, I'm focusing on reproduction, I don't have time to focus on root growth anymore. And so that's where you have to get it.
Well, if we had about another hour, I would even talk about how much root nutrients pull up go down. I mean, you're talking about from tassel to R2, you're probably cutting down 80% of your root uptake. And so that's why when I'm going to talk to y'all about our foliar passes, if it's root uptake off. And a lot of farmers miss that. So this is kind of what the platform looks like. If you do want to check out foliar scripts, you can go to the website. You can either upload a test, or there's a bunch of laboratories. Region Ag Lab, Servitex here in Kansas, they've got several locations. You can essentially send them a plant tissue, say you want to run foliar scripts, and they automatically send it to us and get it analyzed. If they don't, you can go in there and you can upload a CSV file. When we talk about like corn critical timing, we're making a foliar adjustment at V3. We're making a Y drop at V4. So just understand that this Y drop at V4 is not for V4. The Y drop at V4 is for ear length from V7 to V10. The planter pass is going to carry us to that V4 to V5 when we're determining ear girth. And we're just making a foliar pass to correct it if we do need it. The top dress, essentially, or the Y drop at V4 is for the ear length at V7, V8. Top dress foliar, we'll do a foliar pass at V6, V7 if we need one. One of the biggest things we've done is we've changed sulfur. We're putting our sulfur out now. We're using an AMS, which is quickly available. Like if you're using an elemental sulfur, it's going to have to go through some conversions, and you need to apply that sooner. But for us, where we leach so bad, and looking at the uptake curve, just so y'all understand, this one is sulfur. There is very little sulfur going into that plant until we're getting to that tassel time. And then look, sulfur, zinc, copper, and manganese. That's late season. If I put sulfur out in April with the rainfall we get, it's gone by the time we get to tassel.
Russell, how many times do you use tissue save? How often?
I mean, for me, it's just setting up a program that works for your operation. On our base production acres, I like at least 3 tissue samples in a season. I like to pull one at that V4. I like to pull another one at that V7, V8, and then I like to pull another one there right after tassel. That's one of the things I will say, when that tassel comes out on that plant, I'm not spraying anything when we're dropping that pollen on the silks. I would rather wait until we're getting to that brown silk, and then whatever we had at tissue at that early VT, we'll start making those corrections at brown silk, because you just don't want to take a chance and mess up that pollination window.
So you pull a sample at VT and then send it into the lab and get the results so that you can make that application
Later on.
at ground still.
Yep.
Okay.
And if we see a huge weather event change, like if we're getting normal weather, or if it's under a pivot and you can make it rain, that's a really good practice. If you're dry land and say your water shuts off, we'll pull another tissue at that time if we're seeing some dry issues.
Just add one thing to your sulfur. Why your sulfur curve looks like that, and there's a lot of times we don't know. It takes about 8 days for sulfur to uptake into the plant. So because of that length of time, that's why, because you apply sulfur, it's about 8 days before, so it's not delayed in that uptake of sulfur. That's why you see
the big up curve.
Later. It just takes longer to get it.
But one of the things that we've really been using the last 3-4 seasons are drones. Drones have came a very, very long way since the first T30. When we're starting to look at utilizing our drone, so for us particularly in soybeans, it didn't matter if we were running on RTK and guidance. You make a pass in the field, you come back a couple weeks later, those beans have grown back in the row. University was saying about 1.6 to 1.8 bushel loss. We started doing our own testing, and we were coming up with 1.4 to 1.6 bushels that we were taking out every single pass that we made through a bean field, even on guidance, and that's running 30-inch rows. And so that's where we started looking at the efficiency of the drones. We can cover acres pretty close to the same rate. We're using less water. We're seeing a little bit better uptake. One of the things I'll say, and why I put this picture up, they couldn't really see it very good, so we put some fulvics in here to darken it up. But this right here, this vortices, we're not only coating the top part of that leaf, we're coating the under part of the leaf as well. And we're seeing a lot better efficiencies and uptakes when we're making our drone passes versus even using a ground rig. And so what we've been talking about with foliar, so this is the same tissue test that y'all saw earlier, here on the left. And we have the same ranges that we would have had for the last 50 years. What foliar script does is here on potassium, where potassium is a little deficient, I wanted to use a potassium acetate. And when we used a 24% potassium acetate, I said I needed 18 ounces. Now, once again, I'm not picking on the fertilizer companies, but that same fertilizer said 1 to 6 quarts. Well, this is a half of a quart. Well, even if I used their standard rate, that would have cost me another $4.50 an acre. If I would have used their high rate on the high side, that would have been almost another $12 an acre. So this cost me 25 cents an acre to run. This is a pretty good investment for us to run 25 cents an acre, and I'm just talking about one nutrient. And this is, once again, like I told you, we're making that foliar. This was at V3 for us to make our V4 foliar pass. And then looking at like boron, it called for 4 ounces of boron. It called for 2 ounces of a 3% molybdenum. So what happens if you can't get straight potassium acetate? So we use another product called soy sauce. And it's got, I believe, 12% potassium. So say we're going to use soy sauce. Well, I'm going to show you a picture, but when you get your file, it's got a little slide indicator on there, and you can slide it from 24 down to 12 because that's how much potassium is in soy sauce. And so now it's going to change this from 18, and I'm just doing 12 because it'll make it easier for my math and my brain, but it would double this to 36 ounces to use soy sauce. Does that make sense? So I'm not telling you got to buy a specific brand. I'm not telling you got to use a specific product. Do they all work the same? Absolutely not. Like if you look at like what we get from soy sauce and you look at like a potassium chloride, like a 0012, it's going to take 5 times as much product out of a 0012 liquid potassium chloride to get the same response that we get from potassium acetate. And it's just how that potassium interacts with the plant. And so here's one of the farms we worked at, a buddy of mine in Minnesota. I took his name off, he didn't mind me sharing. But like his nitrogen, V7 to V9, you know, he needed 7 ounces of nitrogen. Phosphorus, potassium was good. He was a little bit low on calcium. Sulfur was a little low. His iron was low. Zinc, manganese. Like, these are all telling us down to the ounce. So even if you don't do your own application, if you took this to your local co-op and you handed them the sheet and you said, I have a 160-acre field of corn under a pivot, and this is exactly what I need to the acre blended up. Now, are they going to break down 39.22 ounces? No, you're going to get probably like 42 because it's a co-op and they're going to overpour because they charge you by the ounce. Some of them are still awake.
Hey, Russell,
Yeah.
do you put in yield goals, or is it just strictly you're trying to balance the plant with that?
Right now, it's based on sufficiency ranges and balancing the plant. What I'll tell you is the program can do yield goal. And we use it on our yield goals. The problem is I can't sit at my computer and balance this out for you for 25 cents an acre. The AI is not doing that on its own yet. We're still working on that. But we do have about 20, 25 farms across the country that essentially they send me their emails and they pay us to essentially run the longhand form, the way that I've done it on my computer the last 5 years. And we build these levels to where we know they need to be at certain levels for certain yield goals that they're trying to achieve. But yes, it can do it. It's just the AI is not up to recognizing it yet.
Are you adding soil into a unit?
Yes.
You're blending back?
Yep. So we take soil sample and tissue sample data. And if you're going to try to start taking soil tests and you're going to take tissues and you're trying to push it to a specific yield, you're not going to get that off of 1 or 2 tissues either. That's typically we're 3 or 4 tissue tests into the season, you know, pull a V2, a V4, a V6, a V8, and by V8 we're making those corrections either by Y drop or foliar. So, talking about iron. So, even one of the issues that I have with tissue testing is tissue testing gives us total iron. Plants don't use all iron. We have Fe2 and we have Fe3, and we have to convert one form of iron to another form of iron for that plant to be able to use it. So this right here is the main rib, the main vein on a corn leaf. Look how dark that is, and you can't see through it. And then as we move over here, these are the secondary veins. Look at how translucent that is. Now this will show up on a tissue test, and it'll say that you have sufficient iron. What I'm telling you is if you see this in your corn crop, your bean crop, cotton, it don't matter what it is. If you see this, you're losing yield every second that the sun shines that day. Because sunlight is going through here instead of maximizing photosynthesis and nutrient uptake. Now, how do we correct this? We make foliar passes of iron on our farm. It costs us $1.25 an acre to go out there and add the iron in when we're making our foliar passes. It's cheap, but it more than pays for itself. And one of the cool things is like talking about corn. Say you're getting into, let's not quite tassel, let's say V10. We get to V10 corn. The lower leaves that aren't growing anymore, they'll be completely dark. It's because they've balanced. That leaf isn't stretching and growing and taking as many nutrients. It's already been stabilized. So you'll see that lower canopy, it'll be completely dark green. And those new leaves that are coming up off right before we form that collar and have a new leaf stage, you'll see more of this. And which, to me, that's crazy that we don't even think about those things, because this right here is it's costing us yield. So when we balance the plant, what can happen? This one has 3 full ears on it. Just to give you all an idea, the final stand on this is 49,500. That's final population. So this ain't planted at 12,000 pop and have 3 years on it. This is a final pop of 49.5. This field right here, we were shooting for 500 bushels on. This one here was planted at 38,000. You think 99-16 looks pretty good? There's 4 ears. And those ain't scrubs. Those are full 18, 40, 42 long ears. That one right there made over 400 bushels. I mean, I just say if you got an ear, every ear you add on the plant, that's another 100 bushels once you get past a certain point. It's not as pretty yet. It's not as pretty yet, but here's our soybeans. Look how crazy soybean nutrient uptake is. How many of you here grow beans? Anybody grow soybeans? I'm gonna pick on some more people. Have you ever heard me talk before?
Yeah.
Anybody, who in here grows beans ain't heard me talk before? Come on now, don't be bashful, we're all friends.
I quit growing beans.
Huh?
I quit growing beans.
You quit growing beans?
Nobody grows beans out here.
Well, what's the most needed nutrient in the soybean plant after R3? I've only ever had one other farmer tell me this.
Great job.
Okay.
Yeah, Lynn can't answer it. It's zinc. If you want to see a pretty cool deal, if you grow soybeans, say about R1, R2, go out there and pull a soil sample within 2 inches of that plant, and then monitor your zinc the rest of the season. And if your zinc is low in your tissue test, if you pull another soil sample after R6, you'll actually see some of the fertility increase right there around the base of the plant. Like we can actually see a soybean plant take some of its nutrients and flush it back into the soil through the root system. Nobody talks about that. Well, I worked really hard to get all of those nutrients into the plant to build yield. Why is it going back out? This is one of the biggest things that we've found, is we're short on zinc late season, and we're not maximizing that nutrient and moisture from the stems and the branches into that soybean pod. So this is what the mobile app looks like. It's the same as the tissue I showed you earlier. Anything in green is sufficient. Anything in orange needs addressing. And like I said before, like with zinc, most everybody has a liquid 9% zinc. Say your local co-op has an 8%. You can simply push right here, slide that over to where it says concentration of 8%, and it readjusts how many ounces that you need to apply based on what you have locally. So we're not telling you got to buy from one specific brand and ship it across the country. So since none of you grow beans, this is going to kind of be boring. But when you start balancing plants, like Darren Williams, you grow beans. So I talked to Darren a little bit this year, and Darren tried some new products out. One of them happened to be soy sauce, and it has potassium acetate. And when we balance that nitrogen to potassium ratio, we start seeing nodes that are tighter nodes and they're stacked instead of seeing those really tall. You put a lot of nitrogen on beans, you'll get a 6 foot tall plant that lodges over and put no yield on. It's because that ratio is off. So this is a plant on July the 19th. Just want to take a picture. This is the same field. That's the same plant on the left. It's just dried up a month later. But when you're balancing nutrients and you're making small foliar passes, This is what most of our beans look like now. When you're balancing that hormone exchange and you're balancing nutrients and you're using a foliar program, this is what we see. And it yields pretty well. The last 3 seasons, our farm average has been over 80 bushels. Our county average on beans is 28 to 35 bushels. Now, if you're in Kansas, are y'all realistically dryland going to see 80 bushel beans? Probably not. Could you add another 5 or 10 bushels? Absolutely. Most of the farms that I've seen here in Kansas, there's still 5 or 10 bushels on the table. Go ahead.
What population is that
110,
and what spacing?
30 inches.
Thank you.
We grew beans about 5 years ago, and we had 5 circles, and they all made 80 bushel, and we didn't even hardly try. We just put zinc in furrow because we knew we had a high pH and iron corrosion spots
Did it hurt?
out there, and we did a couple fun passes with the switch on the planter, and we had 0 to 10 bushel where we didn't run that, and 50 to 60 bushel where we had that in those spots.
Where you had your zinc?
And then the next year, we had 20 to 30 bushel increase in our corn crop, and this is 40-year corn ground that's been in continuous corn for 40 years and then changed to beans. I don't know why we don't grow beans, but the price, we just love our corn and our basis at our feed yard, and we just keep growing corn.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I hate soybeans. I call them peasant peas. I farm stuff with, some of y'all might understand. I farm, hillsides with terraces. Nothing's flat. There's trees in the middle. It sucks to pick soybeans. It wears me out. Like, you're just left and right all day watching a header on a hillside move, do this, make sure that you don't eat a groundhog or a small tree that came up. Or people, hey, I had a new one the other year. I had somebody that bought a property that we farmed. We were going to continue to farm it, and they had it surveyed. And a survey company went out there in the dead center of the field and drove a 2-inch rod about 4 inches off of the surface after we planted the bean crop. And that nice little thin bar on the front of your head that your sickle guards go on, it caught that and ripped it completely out, and the tires were standing on it by the time we realized what had happened. So I hate picking beans. If I could do corn every year, I'd be a corn farmer. That's all I do. But with rotation, we see a lot better results with our rotation. So what we focus at on beans, a lot of people say 15-to-1 sulfur and nitrogen is good. If you're there, you're probably deficient. We want to be 12-to-1 or less. Potassium ratios at V4 to V6. Boron on your tissues are really good, but you need to be cutting those plants open and check that main stem and those branches, see if you have hollow points. That'll be an indication that you might be deficient. Molybdenum, we've scared a few people. They told us how many ounces we could put on molybdenum. We doubled that and it didn't die, so we're going to push it again. Nickel. How many of you in here get heat or drought stress? If you get heat or drought stress, there's 20 years. How many of you got an AI tool? Anybody got Snapchat? Who's got Snapchat? All right, if you got Snapchat, there's an AI on your Snapchat, right? Start asking it farming questions. Seriously, ask it about nickel sulfate. It'll start pulling, like AI programs is one of the ways I've learned a lot the last couple of years. It will pull publications that Google doesn't show. Like, I found a 200-page white paper from Iowa that they had 20 years of research that 1 to 2 grams of nickel would help retain 10 to 15% more pods and flowers on your soybeans. And so we're buying nickel off of Amazon for like 10 cents a gram. And so when I make a foliar pass, I'm spending 10, 20 cents an acre, and we're seeing a massive amount of retention of those flowers and pods, which really helps correlate to our bean yield. So that's another one. Copper for pod elasticity. We see a lot of deficient copper in tissue results across the country. And then zinc. Zinc, that R3 to R6 on zinc. So just a foliar pass. So just to give you an idea, we've got 5 acres here with normal production. We've got 5 acres in the middle that we did some fertilizer enhancements with our deep injection. And then we've got 5 acres on the far right-hand side of this field where we added our zinc. So to give you an idea, this is where our plots ended up. This is pretty much the national average, 2,841 seeds per pound. We did some deep injection fertilizer on this plot and got it down a little bit. Where we added the zinc late season, those are not pinto beans. That's the same variety of beans as the other two. But this is a AgVenture 41 Y60. Well, what is that? Ain't it Y60?
Yeah.
But we were down to 1,359 seeds per pound. There's a huge difference between leaving nutrients in the plant and moving nutrients to the pod. And we do that with zinc. Now, if you're a crappy farmer and you don't pay attention to fertility and you don't have a good season and you think you're going to come out here with a bad season and you're just going to put a quart of zinc on here and have this big of a difference, that ain't going to happen either. You've got to balance that plant for the whole season, but if you're short on zinc, that's the huge difference. That's double the yield from left to right, just so y'all understand that. That's huge. So looking at our foliar passes, you know, what's easy isn't always the best. Where we've been doing some compost teas and foliars, so from 2019 to 2023, for every dollar we put into it, we were seeing $1 return or $2 return. That's a pretty good ROI for farming. And when I'm saying that, it's not like we're making hundreds of dollars, but if we're spending 10, 15 bucks on these foliar passes and we're seeing 30 bucks back, that's, you know, how many of y'all would like to have an extra 15 bucks an acre? Yeah. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but what do you think you were at? I mean, we talked about it if you want to share it. I'm not putting you on the spot. If you don't, I'll leave you alone.
You're talking about the soy sauce?
Yeah, with your soy sauce. You saw a 10 bushel increase. How much more money do you think the farm made on half of those acres?
Enough.
Enough? Enough to do it again? I mean, like I said, I wasn't trying to put him on the spot. Me and him talked about numbers, but my point being is Derek Farms here in Kansas, he saw a 10 bushel increase with trying that soy sauce and getting a potassium acetate and balancing that nitrogen to potassium ratio and having some of those benefits in the plant. I mean, if you want to come here, okay. But, and I'm going to leave you with my very last thing. This is why I'm glad I don't farm in Kansas. This is the potential of water stress. That is horrible. I farm right here, so I'm really not that much better than y'all. I mean, essentially, I'm like, you know, that eastern part of Kansas. But my point being is we always try to try new things. Like this year, we had over 42 products that we put in plots. And yes, it takes a little bit of time. And yes, it costs us a little bit of money because not all of them are winners. But the one thing that I wanted to talk to y'all about was we had 60 days of drought. This is the same corn variety planted in the same field. The left-hand side of the field didn't get the product, the right-hand side did. But the videos of this corn is tight like a cigar. And where we had the kelpine, it looked good. It didn't stress as much. There's a product out there called kelpine. It's a seaweed extract and a cactus extract, so it's got kelpine and terpenes in it. It cost us about $5 an acre to run this, and our final numbers came back. We were at like 13 point something bushels per acre better. So we put this in furrow, and to run a product in furrow for $5 an acre, see a 13 plus bushel return on it. And if you're in a drought or a heat stressed environment, this right here is a product that I wanted to tell y'all about because I think y'all would see a big benefit to that in Kansas. So I don't know what time we've got, but if we got time for questions, I appreciate y'all listening to me ramble.
We got time.
But if you got questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Go ahead.
Have you done anything with PGRs on corn?
Have I done anything with PGRs on corn? Yes. We have played around with a lot of things. Rule number 1 is we never spray gibberellic acid after tassel. We did that one year and it cost us over 100 bushels on that section. What I like to do now is we've been running 2 ounces of Cytoplex in furrow for Miller Chemical, and we've been coming back pretty much after tassel, and we've been trying some cytokines to kind of push that grain fill to help us with that grain fill later in the season. But those are the 2 that we've really liked the most. And if you can't get that Cytoplex in furrow, you can make an over-the-top application like where we're doing that V3, V4 foliar pass. You can put some of it on them, but it's got an auxin, a gibberellic, and a cytokine in it. And we've seen good payback and ROI on that.
What about that same product on beans?
Yeah, we're running, the one thing I'll tell you about beans, if you're going to run PGRs, earlier the better. If you're trying to go out there like Cytoplex, if you try to go out there and you're after that 4th, 5th trifolia, you're probably not gonna see a very good return on it. If we're gonna put cytoplex, we either need to run it in furrow, or we need to be out there second, third trifolia, and really expressing that plant and stacking those nodes and keeping it down pretty tight early in the season. We've done the same thing with beans, where we had some drought stress, and then we started picking up moisture, and we wanted to kind of help push that bean along to kind of stack some more flowers and pods that we missed in the dry spell, so we did some cytokines. They've got a straight, what is the cytokine?
Cytokine is the straight.
Yeah, it's the straight one from Miller, and we've used it. We've used a couple other products from CHS and a couple products from Triangle. I'll just be honest with you, I think Miller's gonna be the company that we stick with, because we're just seeing better response out of their products than other people's.
Are these foliar strips good for any row crop like cotton? We raise cotton.
It's coming.
Okay.
Right now, it's just corn and beans. Wheat should be finished up this year and available for next year's wheat crop. We've got 15 or 20 vegetables, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, okra, all kinds of stuff like that. We're working on cotton. Cotton is just a fickle creature that I hate to deal with. And so we're trying to get the AI program. I don't want to rush to failure. Like, could I give you a cotton recommendation right now? Absolutely. Is it as good as I would want it to be to use on my farm? No. So until it is, we're not going to release that. So as soon as we get the numbers where they need to be, and that's just having enough sample sites to where that AI can compute it out, then we'll release it then. But we're doing it for grain sorghum as well. We're working on that. So there's a couple of new ones that'll be coming out fairly soon. Any other questions?
How many passes are you doing like with your drones and stuff like that? Like
High yield or base production?
just on like a normal.
Normal base production acres on the drone, 2 to 3 depending on the season. I mean, on corn acres, we're gonna make that early season, and then we're gonna make that late season. Could I do the ground rig early season? Yes, but I try to plant a crop as perfectly as I can, and I absolutely hate to run it over. So that's why we utilize the drone so much.
On the drum with the vortexes or vortices, are you changing the height of it to try and encourage those vortices from getting the bottom side?
There is a lot to learn on drones.
Okay.
One is speed. If you go too slow, you blow it down too hard. If you go too fast, it essentially looks like an airplane, and it's just drifting in the wind, and you're not getting that prop wash. Typically, we're running about that 20, 25 mile an hour speed. If it's no wind, we'll run a very fine droplet. In the great state of Kansas, where the wind always blows, you're probably going to be a medium to a medium coarse droplet. And what you've got to understand is when you go from that fine mist and you're getting that vortices pushing it out, that's how we get to, we're running 33-foot swaths. But if you're running in wind and you're going to a coarser droplet, you're probably going to be down to that 18, 21 feet. So you're going to have to narrow that swath up. And that even depends on the brand. We've ran DJI, XAG. We got the very first J100 from EA Vision that ever came in the country. We've been playing with that. The reason I don't talk about it is nobody's figured it out yet. And the people that say they do, they're full of crap. They ain't ran it long enough. And so it just depends on the brand. But yeah, that technology is probably, I think, what we're going to see. I think in the future, you're going to see a base station that hooks up to your pivot power, and you put a couple totes out there, it recharges itself, refills itself, and it's making passes, and you don't even have to be there. I think we see that in the next 5 years, which would be pretty cool. No more questions? All right, listen, I appreciate y'all's time, and Nick, thanks for having me.